Hello, my name is Frederick Sharpe, and I was born 191 years ago in 1831 in Nottingham, England. Yes, the Robin Hood Nottingham. When I had left, it was a very sophisticated city with several railroads and five-storied buildings. I was apprenticed at the age of 10 under my father, William Sharpe, to become a butcher. It was a fine trade for many years. While many Brits were coming to Canada, skilled professional German butchers were coming to Britain in waves. They provide something we didn't have before: cheap, ready-made food. Pork pies, sausages, rissoles, salted, smoked, and pickled meats. Pigs. There were pig butchers. Would you believe that people would actually stop and pick up food to take home to eat after work? Father's business went way down, and unemployment was very high. So in 1850, the family decided to come to Canada, and we settled in Nelson, Ontario. You know it better today as Burlington, Ontario. But I was like many other young men, and I wanted to go further west to find my own way. So I came to Tillsonburg. It was the best decision I ever made. In 1855, I married Sarah Brown, who was also from England. Life was not easy, but it was a good life, and we were very happy. Our first son, Robert, was born in 1857, and William followed in 1858. We did well by Tillsonburg. There were 4 other butcher shops in town at the time, but my sales sailed right past them, for I took advantage of adding pork. I did very well and was able to purchase property right on Broadway. The butcher shop was on the northwest corner of Rideout Street, with a great big window in which we would attract a large clientele with our selection of meat and take-your-home dinner food we would provide. Young men who had come to Tillsonburg without wives were very pleased not to have to cook every night. We kept the shop neat and tidy and smelling good, with fresh sawdust strewn on the floor every day to help soak up the blood and the odor. There were regulations as to the weight and quality of meat, and of course the barrels we used when we needed them for a large order. People liked to get the meat fresh, and some came several times a week just to purchase it. We slaughtered in the fall and early winter, and the cold would help preserve the meat, but we also preserved it by salting and smoking it in the spring and summer while the cattle were still growing. Beside the shop was our home, although it's much higher off the street with some 20 steps to climb up. It was already built, and we were very happy to move in. Many people remember that Dr. John Reed had lived in our house before, and that his sister, Minerva Reed, was the first lady doctor in town. Those were happy years and good years with the arrival of more children: Thomas, Marianne, Josephine, and Emma. In 1869, I sold land right from the corner to the E.D. Tillson Realty Board, right from the corner to what became known as the Graves Building. That's the big red one on the west side of Broadway. I then purchased lot 21 on Bidwell Street. Now I had 2 full lots and 3/4 of a third. Later I sold lot 21 on Bidwell Street to the Wesleyan Methodist Church, on which they would build their beautiful manse, which is still standing today. Unfortunately, I did not live a long life. I passed away in 1878. I was blessed to have been successful financially, for I left my wife Sarah all on her own to raise the children. My eldest son Robert had been working with me for a few years now and was able to keep the business going. Unfortunately, my death did interrupt his wedding plans. He and Frances got married quietly in Ingersoll a couple weeks after my death. My widow Sarah felt she had something to prove to the town about me, for she spent so much of our hard-earned money on constructing this crypt. The walls are 2 bricks thick, made of the highly polished yellow brick from the Tillson brickyard. She also had this very ornate tombstone made. It's the fanciest one in the graveyard. It does tell of her love, though. A wreath signifies memory, and a rosebud love. A rosebud is used for children, but my roses are in full bloom, for I was in my prime. Take a closer look at the hands. My hand is reaching out for Sarah's, for I shall welcome her to heaven one day. You can tell a lot of work went into the stone by the delicate hands and lace cuff. Imagine, it is over 140 years old. My Sarah remarried some 8 months after my death to Henry Hyatt, who was 15 years her junior. What could Henry see in a woman with 4 children still at home? It must have been all the money I left her. He certainly turned her head. What I failed to understand is why Sarah didn't see his plan. Well, the marriage did not work out. Sarah divorced Henry a short time later, but the marriage did last long enough for her to bear him a baby girl. Divorces back then were very expensive, took an act of parliament, and were very degrading. Following my demise, my son Robert took over as owner, and shortly thereafterwards joined forces with another butcher in town, a William Moffat. Their shops were now known as Moffat and Sharpe, and the business did do very well. It should be noted that Robert was able to purchase lots on Tillson Avenue and King Street, ironically through the E.D. Tillson Realty Board. Robert, who had been working as a butcher for some 50 years in Tillsonburg and living on Bidwell Street, retired in 1925, and he passed away in 1937. I had a good family, a good business, and although my life was too short for my liking, it was a good life, and it seems I'm the only one who's representing the family today in Tillsonburg. That's all.
Hello. I would like to share with you a little bit about my life growing up and living in Tillsonburg. I went through my memoirs and I found some of the parts that I thought might be interesting to share with you today. Life was sometimes difficult being part of an important family. My grandfather George founded Tillsonburg, and my father E.D. made it boom. I was born Catherine Marilla Tillson in 1853, but everyone called me Lily. I grew up when the town was really starting to prosper. People were still immigrating from Europe and the United States, and all manner of businesses were growing. Young men came to make their fortune, just as my family did. It was a very exciting time. My older sister Maggie and I were very close, and we shared everything. Well, almost everything. Maggie had a very handsome beau, and I was jealous, as I liked him too. When Maggie died, she was only 21, I thought perhaps I could win his love, but I could not. I would have married him without his love, and marrying into the Tillson family, he could have gone far, but he was so bereft he left town. When Lachlan Sinclair talked to Father about marrying me, I almost laughed. He was much older than I, 14 years older, and a widower with 2 boys. I may not be allowed to marry for love, but I at least wanted to marry someone my own age. Father and Mother thought that Lachlan would be good for me, and as a doctor, he certainly met their qualifications. They allowed him to court me. Lachlan was persistent in wooing me, and after a year we were married. It was October 4th, 1876, and I was 23 years old. My dress was a beautiful lavender silk, and I had a pretty bridal veil which reached to the bottom of my dress. We married at 7 a.m. in the house I grew up in. You probably know it, the big rooming house across from my brother's home, Seven Gables. We left on the 9:42 train for our honeymoon. Lachlan put a sign on his office door which stated, "Married and gone to the Centennial in Philadelphia." It was not easy suddenly becoming a wife and a mother, but my life was much different than my mother's. When she first came here to Durham Forge, it was all bush. She had to grow all her own food and make all her own clothes. Not me. We had stores. Tillsonburg was an incorporated town, and Canada was a nation. We worked hard as children when we were growing up. Grandfather and Father owned most of the land and businesses, so everyone was put to work where we were needed. As one of the oldest girls, I had to tend to the little ones, help with the housework, garden, and such, but we still made time for church and socializing. Once married, my life became one of ease, even with 2 boys. as Lachlan was older and established. He had begun as a teacher, but so wanted to be a physician. That took a lot of money, and after a year in medical school, he had to leave due to finances. He returned to Tillsonburg and became principal of the public school. Can you imagine? At that time, I was only 8 years old, and he was my principal. He did manage to complete his medical training finally, returning to Tillsonburg and entered into practice with Dr. Sylvanus Joy for 1 year. He was, as Dr. Joy called him, the embodiment of energy, and that energy was good for our town. He always cared for the school system and was a trustee for 6 years. He was a counselor several times on town council and was mayor twice. Lachlan was very good to me. We rose to the top of the social ladder. He even designed her a very fine hand-painted china dinner set of 175 pieces. It is probably unlike any other set in the world. Our family grew with the arrival of our 3 daughters, Lillian Mary, Muriel, who unfortunately only survived 6 weeks, and Marguerite Van Norman. Lachlan built our magnificent mansion on Lisgar Avenue. The Sinclair house was even more beautiful than my parents' fancy house on Annandale Farm. Ours was meant to be a showcase, with its servants' quarters, Italian fresco ceilings, ballroom, and we had the finest private library in town with over 1,400 books. It was not I, but Lachlan, who was the beau of the ball. Sinclair House was used to celebrate everything from present to past. Our 10th anniversary was grand with 100 guests, but so was the celebration to honor all those who served on the town council in 1885. I raised our children and managed our large estate as Lachlan was busy being a doctor and helping to sculpt our town. I was also busy organizing our social life, which took a lot of time, as well as doing charitable work and being active at the Wesleyan Methodist Church. The doctor passed away in 1903, and I thought my life would become quieter, but that was not the case. The children were grown up. Louis, his son, who was also a doctor, didn't marry, but Victor, who was a lawyer, and our daughter Lillian both got married. Marguerite was just coming of age, and we did her 3-month coming out tour of Europe. She later became a nurse and went to Europe during World War I. Father died, and Mother was not in the best of health, so I spent much of my time with her. At the same time, we were training my sister Hattie's daughter, Rosalind, in the management of a home with servants. Both Rosalind and our Marguerite had their coming out ball at the IODE Hall in Ingersoll. It was quite an affair. It was hard without Lachlan, for even though I was not enthusiastic with our marriage in the beginning, he was a good man, and we had an exciting life together. I eventually decided to move and live in Montreal with Marguerite after the war, as she was a spinster and could care for me in my later years. These are just some of my memories that I have shared with you today. I hope to be able to visit again soon and maybe be able to share some more then. Thank you, and have a good day.